Welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam. In this video, we're going to show off some things that are looking good in the winter garden here in Raleigh, North Carolina. It's a strange season right now. Some of the things that I'll show you in this video are like right on time, and some of them are way ahead of schedule. We were over at the Ralston Arboretum yesterday. There's still some of the summer perennials blooming, a few here and there. Some of the things that should be blooming in March, blooming in January. And then some of the things, are kind of right on time, but it is an odd winter so far because the lowest temperature we've had is like 23, 24, and it didn't stay there for long. Most nights have been right around 31 to 35, and it just hasn't been enough cold really to shut everything down for the winter. But some things are right where they normally are, and this Edgeworthia is an example of that. This is Edgeworthia chrysantha. You can see the flower buds hanging down below. They have nodding flowers, so the flowers kind of face down, and you can see that just as the buds are on the plant during the winter time. They're just as showy as the actual open flowers. The flowers are extremely fragrant, and we're several weeks away, hopefully, from them opening up. I hope they don't try to open up here during the month of January, but it's within the realm of possibility that they'll do that. They have a little bit of yellow and a little bit of white in them. There are some other colors available as well. This plant is structurally interesting. The leaves are absolutely beautiful when the leaves come out on it later in the season, and then these flower buds are on it for a long period of time. These started forming months ago. They've gotten larger and larger and larger. Eventually they'll open with that color and that fragrance, and then it'll leaf out. And it's just, again, it's just structurally beautiful. It has never been pruned, and it keeps this kind of almost perfect form like this. I've talked about in the past how it always branches in threes. So wherever it branches from, here's a spot here where it branched into three. Previous year it branched into three, the previous year it branched into three, and the previous year and you can see it all the way down through the plant. It's super, super interesting. And because it does that every time, it ends up in this just absolutely perfect form with almost no pruning. It will get large over time. At some point I am going to have to size control this because they do get quite large over a long period of time. But again, it's one of our, it's always been one of my absolute favorites. I sold them like crazy and grew tons of them when I had my nursery. It was just, I could take this out, for sale in February, and most people had just never seen it before. Not a hard plant to grow, really. It's actually native to riparian areas and where it's from in Asia. So it will take it'll take planting in a spot where it can root down into some wetter areas, or it can be just really extremely drought tolerant. Easy plant. Next up, the sweet box is already blooming. These have like a kind of a sweet vanilla smell to them on warmer days. I'm shooting this in the morning. There's literally frost on the ground right this minute, and frost on the plant. So a little early in the morning to get that fragrance, but on warmer days, these tiny little white flowers that are on the bottom of these branches are incredibly fragrant. So there's several different species of sweet box or sarcococca that are used in the landscape. This one is Confucia, which gets a little bit taller than some of the others, and the leaves are a little bit bigger. You'll see some of the sweet box is only a foot tall or so. The word box in the name is important because this is basically, this is in the boxwood family. So this is this is one. So it's a fragrant boxwood, basically. This is, you can see how compact this is. This is another plant we just don't have to prune. And so again, when you're picking out a sweet box for your garden, these are great part shade plants. They're super, super, super easy. Always have the dark green, shiny foliage, but make sure you're picking one that fits the kind of appropriate height for what you're doing. This one will get somewhere in that 2.5 foot range, and again then start getting wider from there. This was 3 very, very small plants that were just planted together, and they've grown into this kind of low dome at this point. And again, they offer flowers in warm days in January, and then probably throughout February, and then they're kind of done, and then the rest of the time it's just a perfect little green ornamental ball. The white shishi Camellia sasanqua continues to show off. It's almost it's almost done. The thing with these camellias, and whether they're Camellias sasanquas or japonicas, whatever, whatever you have, it's usually years before they really, really ramp up with the number of flowers they're going to have. So this one's its second year in the ground, and it had a lot more flowers than it did last year. I expect this next year it'll really, really have a lot. And we're going to do a couple things over here to open this space up a little bit, give it a little bit more sunlight. These are definitely part shade plants, but they'll take a little more sun than this one's currently getting. This one has that great double white, vivid flower. Camellias are pretty good at self-cleaning. A lot of people don't like white flowers because they can brown on the plant and then stick around. This one tends to, we have a frost or a freeze, it browns the flower, and then it drops off. And the next flower takes its place pretty quickly. So it doesn't end up as just, with that all over it. It's just amazingly self-cleaning, beautiful plant. One of the Southern Living Plant Collection camellias, October Magic White Shishi is what this one is called. And the flowers, these are a little small, these late flowers. The ones that were on it earlier in the season before it got this cold were a little bit larger than this, but that's a good example of what the flower looks like. That's about 2/3 size of what we were getting back in October. Another real show off in the garden, which unfortunately we're gonna have to move, is this Snow Joey viburnum. This is it's a fantastic 4-season plant. It gets white flower clusters in the spring. You can see the ones that are left over from last year. Then has beautiful green foliage during the summertime. Eventually forms berries on it. Then in the winter time, it does this kind of mixed bag of tricks where it has some of the kind of reddish foliage on it, some yellower leaves down in the middle that it's actually shedding right now, and still maintains some of the green leaves as well. It's really it's very striking, it's very beautiful. We put it in the wrong spot. That happens when you're gardening. This thing is going to have to move to a new location, or maybe move to another landscape or garden altogether. We've got a friend who needs some screening plants. This might be it's probably a great choice for them to use on their landscape. Really, really like this plant. This is Viburnum lusanicum is the species on this one. A very vigorous grower. I mean, most of the things in this garden are only, less than 3 years old, especially the things out here in the front garden. So it has really done a lot of growing in a hurry. So I think it'd be a fantastic screening plant. And it's one of those plants it's a different plant every season, but always beautiful. But I'm going to, in a couple weeks or 3 or 4 weeks, you'll see me cut this thing back and relocate it here in this garden or somewhere else, and open up this space a bit. It happens sometimes we put things in place and then, they get a little bigger than we expect or quicker than we expect. I knew this thing would get pretty big, but it's just jumped up in a hurry, which is great for folks who need a quick screen. This is a plant that I'm kind of irrationally excited about. This is an aspidistra or cast iron plant called Asahi, and it looks all tattered and worn right now, but this is what we've been waiting for, is the white tip on that leaf. This particular variety gets these white tips on every leaf, and it's incredibly bright in the garden. There's one of these over at the J.C. Ralston Arboretum, and every time I see it, it's in a deep shade, and it's just like this glow in a wooded space. On these aspidistra, toward the end of winter, sometime around the 1st of March, we will cut these tattered leaves back to the ground. So the old tired leaves go away and it regenerates new leaves. What's interesting is this is the first couple, right toward the end of last year, we got the first couple leaves that are showing off the traits that we bought it for. This is a lot of times, it can take a couple years on a slow growing plant like this. These are asparagus family members, and a lot of times they have to go to sleep during the winter and wake up bigger, better, fuller. And that's true with a lot of members of that group. And so that's what it's doing. It's asleep right now. I'll cut back some of these old tattered leaves in March, and we'll get a whole new group of leaves. And the leaves we're going to get this next year will probably be almost twice this height that these first 2-year leaves are, and they'll show a whole lot more color off this next year. One of the things we expect to bloom during the winter are the hellebores or the Lenten roses, but not this early. I'm filming this on January the 4th, I think. And here we are. There are going to be, several of them we have here in the garden are going to try to come into full bloom a little bit too early. Normally, as the new foliage is emerging, we go through and cut back all the old leaves from last year to really let the flowers kind of stand out, and then they'll reform new leaves around the plant. So I've got to get in here and do that sooner than later. Some years I put up a video talking about hellebore maintenance, and so all we do is track these leaves all the way back into the plant and cut them back and just leave this center. I usually leave them a little bit longer than this, but here we are in early January and it's jumping way ahead. So I'll probably just go ahead and clean them up and roll with it. Hopefully we don't get anything that really will damage these open flowers, but who knows. Not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about the Marvel Mahonia, but I will point out all the flowers on it, how great this thing looks right this minute. But there's an upcoming video on all things Mahonia. We're going to shoot between this garden and over at the J.C. Ralston Arboretum as well. But you can see how showy these are. Any amount of warm days in the wintertime, and they really get going. And the honeybees, mid-afternoon on a warm day, just swarm to this thing, and it's still really just kind of getting started. It'll be blooming probably for 60 more days. Normally when we're showing these flowering plants, we're showing them in full flower. This Pieris is still a few weeks away from opening up these flowers, but just the racemes, where the flowers are attached that weep down off the side of the plant, look absolutely fantastic. And what'll happen with this is we'll get these white flowers, will open up, and it'll just be almost solid white for a couple of weeks. And then after the flowers fade, the new growth will start on it, and it'll be, a really kind of vivid red color for weeks and weeks and weeks during the spring. I expect this one to really put on some growth. It's planted in a kind of a dry shade area back here, and it had a setback the first year. It recovered from that. It's rooted in well. Now it's competing with all the trees and everything back here behind this fence. And it's in great shape. And I expect it to, really put on some size and be showing off from now until summer, and then it'll go back into this kind of green form, eventually reform these flower buds into late summer and early fall. Over here in our plant storage area, we've got a Carex called Feather Falls, and man, this is such a great Carex. We have Everillo and a few other Carex in the garden as well. Feather Falls tends to be a little bit more vigorous, and so we've seen this one down at Dr. Armitage's house. It's probably as much as 2 feet tall and a little wider than that in time. So a lot of the other Carex we're using in the garden here, much smaller. So this one is a real standout. We had it in a container this past year, but this is just a one-off. It's super, super showy. These are hardy for almost everyone watching this video. I think they're hardy in zone 5 to 9. Those of you up in zone 5, it will probably take a little winter damage that you can just cut back in the late winter. If you don't have to cut them, don't cut them. They're kind of slower to recover. They're not, Carex are grass-like plants. They're not really, they're not technically grasses. And again, if you cut them back, and you can, and you'll get all new foliage on them, they're a little bit slower to come back out than some other grasses, actual grasses would be. Just fantastic plants. They do get a little flower spike on them in the late summer. It's pretty insignificant. It's really just grown for this bright, bright foliage. And here we are in January. And look how good this thing looks all the way across the garden. We have a bunch of plants in storage that we had in containers over here, so that's the reason they're all clustered here together. But look what kind of standout this is. Another camellia showing off here in the garden. This is Camellia Sasanqua Bella Rouge. This is another Southern Living Plant Collection one. It's another one that has just this great ornamental landscape habit. Most of our camellias can get big, big, big. And this one they're all ultimately going to get big if you let them. But this one has a nice spreading habit, and so we could keep this down this height pretty much permanently. Just in kind of any vertical growth we get on it, we can cut it out. You can see what kind of heavy bloomer this one is. Bella Rouge is the perfect name for this. Really, really, really dark, dark pink, on the verge of being red at times. All the flower parts in the middle of it are exposed. It's kind of a semi-double, so from a distance, it appears to be a double flower, rose-like flower, but you can see the center parts of the flower there. So, honeybees will come and work these if if it's a warm day out. This is pretty late for these Camellia sasanquas to be blooming. Normally, they bloom for us here in our area. They'll bloom through most of the winter deeper south, but here in our area, we'll get cooler nights in October, and they'll start to get some flowers in October, kind of peak in November. By this time of year, we've gotten enough cold to really kind of end the flowering on the Camellia sasanquas, and we should be waiting for the Camellia japonicas. Instead, they've just crossed over one another. The japonicas are already blooming, and the sasanquas are still blooming. But this thing still has quite a few flower buds on it, but at this point it's been blooming for almost 3 months. And it just has a perfect form. Most gardens, you'd be able to fit this plant. Part shade is best on these. Back where we started, at the Edgeworthia, let us know down below, is there anything in your garden still showing off at this time of the year? If it might be bark color, it could be something that loses its leaves and is interesting with or without flowers. There's, of course, lots of types of things that are winter interest other than mostly flowers that I've shown off in this video. Of course, that snow joey over there is really showing off in a very different way with its multicolored foliage as well. Let us know down below. Thanks for watching. She's a good girl. She's a good girl.